So before I show you a bunch of pretty pictures of butterflies and the plants that go with them, I want to first discuss why you might want to plant native plants to attract butterflies. And first we need to explain what native is. So native plants are the ones that were here before settlement. And settlement started in Kalamazoo County around 1828. Settlers came in from the east, and they encountered the native vegetation, which they largely just cut back and plowed under, and they started farming. So the plants that were here before all of that happened are the ones that we call native. And the other plants that have come in since then, some of them from all over the world, we just kind of lump into exotic. So that's a little bit as to the difference between what is native and exotic. In general, native plants, you want to use native plants because they need less care, because they are adapted to our climate and soils. They're more disease resistant than the exotics. They don't need fertilizer and pesticides, or they need little or no watering at all because they are just adjusted to our area. Also, in general, native plants are less aggressive than the exotics because they're being kept in check by the native insects that have evolved with them. That is not the case with many of the exotics, which have become very invasive because they have no natural enemies. For example, the alien garlic mustard is crowding out our native woodland wildflowers and need to be controlled. So also in general, the root structures of our native plants, especially the prairie plants, are better at anchoring and improving the soil. They prevent runoff, they replenish the groundwater, and they sequester carbon. And a good example of showing this is by this poster. So on the very left, you can see plain old lawn grass, sod. It doesn't grow very tall and doesn't have very deep roots. Whereas all the other plants on the right of that are prairie plants. And they have a lot of vegetation above ground for all kinds of wildlife to hide in. And they have these deep roots. And both all the vegetation above ground and the deep roots sequester the carbon. The water quality is improved because as the water seeps into the soil, the water gets channeled down through the soil along all those roots and they help to channel the water down into the groundwater and even into the aquifers. And all those roots also help to anchor the soil so the soil doesn't get washed away in big rainstorms, for example. So native plants are really very good at all those things to help protect the soil and to provide habitat for wildlife. Native plants also support a greater number and greater species diversity of insects than exotics, and thereby preserving biodiversity. Even cultivars of native plants may not be as desirable as the original native plants. Cultivars usually are bred for human visual impact, and the insects may not be drawn to them. For example, on the bottom there, you see the black-eyed Susan. Some insects in order to get nectar from that central dark part of the flower, need to land on the petals. It's kind of like landing strips. And if they come across the cultivar of that black-eyed Susan, they may not realize, they may not have a landing strip to land on. So the cultivars are not, and also some of the cultivars really don't have any nectar in them. They have been, the nectar providing characteristics have been bred out. So why are insects important? Well, insects are important because they pollinate many flowering plants, thereby assuring the production of seed for plant propagation and as food source for many species, including humans. Insects are also important to many critters, but especially to birds. Birds not only eat the insects themselves, but also exclusively feed them to their young. So insects are very important to all of us, the birds, all the other critters, and as humans. Many of our fruit trees are insect pollinated, so without the insect pollinating of fruit trees, we might not have apples and cherries and peaches. So this is an example of a butterfly garden to attract butterflies with native plants. At the Wolf Lake Fish Hatchery, just outside the back door of the visitor center, there was this scruffy lawn area that everybody just walked over, and the grass never really grew, and it always looked terrible. So we decided to put in a butterfly garden there. And 3 years later, you can see the picture much different. Both pictures show the bench. So you can see which side is the building and which side is the garden. So that is actually a very nice. And the garden was put in 2006, and it's still going strong now. The garden is also registered as a monarch way station. Monarch way stations are a project of Monarch Watch, and they are designed to create, conserve, and protect monarch habitats. So when people put in a butterfly garden, they can register them as a monarch way station. And you don't really need to have a sign up because the monarchs will find the milkweed no matter what. But it's a nice example to show people how to protect monarchs. Now, go a little bit over the biology of butterflies. Butterflies are in the insect order Lepidoptera, and Lepidoptera means that they are scaled winged insects. The anatomical features of butterflies that they have two pairs of wings. They have a pair of forewings and a pair of hind wings. They have a head. Behind the head is the thorax, and behind that the abdomen. They have two antennae, 6 legs, 2 compound eyes, and a proboscis. I really like the antenna of this Baltimore butterfly with those bright orange little tips at the end of the antenna. And a little bit about the structural features of the caterpillars. The caterpillar has a head, just like the adult does, obviously, and but they have simple eyes, not compound. The antennas are very short. So in this picture, the antennae are really the real short ones on the head and not the longer tubercle ones. So they have the short antenna, they have very strong chewing parts because that is really what caterpillars do. They eat a lot of vegetation, and so they need strong chewing parts. So behind the head is the thorax with the true legs. There's 3 sets of what we call true legs. And then there is the abdomen, which what we call the prolegs. And they have spiracles. And some caterpillars have tentacles and or tubercles. So if you look at the picture on the right, the true legs are the 2 little legs on the left with a little, what looks like little toes. And then a proleg is one that's on the right. That's a fat little leg. And then above that, you see 3 oval dark spots. And those are the spiracles. And the spiracles are the areas of a caterpillar that they breathe through. Their respiratory system is not like ours, so they don't have lungs like we do, and mouth. They don't breathe through their mouths, but they have these spiracles that they breathe through. So very different anatomical features from ours. So butterflies have life stages, 4 life stages actually: the egg, the caterpillar, the pupa, which in the case of butterflies we usually call chrysalis, and then the adult butterfly. Here are some examples of eggs. The top left is a red admiral egg. You can see that is the smallest stick pin that I could find, and you can see how small that red admiral egg is. And below that is a monarch egg, which is off-white and has little ridges. That's how you kind of recognize a monarch egg. Now, question mark, both question marks and the commas, they have a tendency to lay eggs kind of on top of each other like that. But usually, butterflies just lay them singly. In the top right are eggs of a yellow bear, which is a moth. Moths quite often lay large numbers of eggs right all next to each other. But butterflies have a tendency to lay them more singly. So after the eggs hatch, you of course get the caterpillars. And as caterpillars eat and grow, they outgrow their skins and they need to shed them. And they do that 5 times. And each time that they do that, they call it an instar. That's just a terminology for this process. And you can see this is the 5 instars of the monarch caterpillars. In the top right, you can see the dark spot behind the caterpillar is the skin that caterpillar has just shed. And you can't really tell necessarily by size what instar you have. The first instar you can tell from the others because the head is black and all the others are striped. But on the bottom right, you see two second instars. One has just shed its skin, and the other one is just about ready to go to the next instar, the third instar. It has eaten and grown. So size isn't necessarily a way you could tell the instars apart. The next stage of butterfly metamorphosis is a chrysalis stage. In the case of the monarch butterfly, it forms a prepupal J. And then you have the chrysalis. The caterpillar, the J sheds the skin the last time, and underneath is already the chrysalis. And then the night before, the butterfly comes out, the chrysalis becomes clear, and you can already see the butterfly inside. Again, for a monarch, when he closes, that's a fancy word for saying emerging. When the butterfly emerges, it has a large abdomen, and the wings are very small. In the abdomen, it has a liquid that it pumps into the wings to expand them. And you can see after 5 minutes, the abdomen has become a little skinnier and the wings have expanded some. And after about 30 minutes, the wings are completely expanded. So at that point, the wings are very soft and pliable, and they can't really fly yet, so they have to wait for several hours before the wings harden and before they can fly off. So what are really the essentials for caterpillar, for butterflies and for moths, as a matter of fact, and a lot of other critters. But in the case of butterflies, the caterpillar needs food to eat and grow, and the adult needs nectar plants. And in this case, you see the monarch eating milkweed and then drinking nectar from the flower. So caterpillars, depending on what species of butterfly it is, they can be kind of fussy eaters. You have, for example, the black swallowtail, whose food plants are in the parsley family. And we show here the golden alexander, which is a native plant in the parsley family. And then the monarchs, their food plants are milkweeds. Any kind of milkweed is suitable for them. They don't just eat common milkweed, for example, but they eat pretty much all the milkweeds. Another more fussy eater is the Baltimore butterfly caterpillar. Its food plant is turtlehead or plantain, but the one that is most commonly known is the turtlehead. And then for the American lady butterfly, the food plants are sweet everlasting and pussy toes. Less fussy eater are, for example, the mourning clove, which eat several tree species, including American elm, and the red-spotted purple butterfly, which eats several tree species, including black cherry. So they find more species of plants suitable for eating. I'll go over some of the different butterfly life stages. This here is the giant swallowtail. Host plants are hop tree or prickly ash or rue. Now, most people could probably accommodate a hop tree in their yard, but they probably would not want to plant a prickly ash because it has a tendency to spread and form thickets and then they're very prickly. But if you have only a very small yard and no place for a tree, you can plant a plant that's called rue, common rue. And it is non-native, but it is a host plant for both the giant swallowtail and the black swallowtail. So you can make an exception and plant rue instead of a native plant. So the giant swallowtail is called one of the bird-dropping butterflies because their caterpillars look like a bird dropping. That's that bottom center picture. And like all swallowtail, the caterpillars, when they get ready to pupate, they attach themselves by the hind end to a twig or a solid substrate. And then they spin a kind of a silken thread that they attach their front end to. And then they shed their skin, and you can see the silken thread again in the chrysalis. And the center picture there is just another picture of a chrysalis. It shows it very nicely where it is attached at the bottom there with a little silken pad. And also on the right, it shows very nicely how the chrysalis almost looks like a little offshoot of a little branch. So it doesn't really look like a live critter, but it looks just like part of the twig. And then the bottom left is the upper side of the butterfly, and the bottom right, the underside. They look quite different from the two sides. Spice bush swallowtail, again, the small end stars again look like bird droppings, but then as they shed their skin several times, they end up looking like the center one at the last instar. The head is really just that little sliver of yellow that you see at the very front. Those spots really are part of the thorax. As just before the caterpillar pupates, it changes color to that orange color, and then it forms the prepupal on the bottom right, still having that eye spot, and the chrysalis is on the left, and of course in the center you have the adult butterfly. Tiger swallowtail. The host plants are many trees, especially tulip tree. So I had a hard time finding these because they have a tendency to be up high in the trees, and I just didn't climb trees. Again, the small caterpillar looks like a bird dropping again. And then the middle picture is one of the middle instars, and the right picture is the last instar. It wasn't until I saw this picture of the chrysalis that I saw those two spots that almost look like the right position where they are on the last instar there. So those eye spots. So I was kind of surprised to see that because I had not seen it when I saw the chrysalis in person. And then you have an adult on the left, and on the right you actually have two tiger swallowtail adults. The one on the right, which is yellow, can either be a male or a female. But in the tiger swallowtails, you have the female can have a yellow morph, or it can have a dark morph. So while you don't know whether the one on the right is a male or a female, you do know the one on the left is a female. Things are always complicated. Black swallowtail. The host plant for that are golden Alexanders in this case, but they're plants in the parsley family. Again, you have the same way they attach themselves, just like the others. The interesting part here is that they have two color morphs in the chrysalis stage. Now, most often you find the green chrysalis morph in the summer when the leaves are green, and they seem to, it's a good way to be camouflaged. And in the fall, most of them are tan color when they're attached to the twigs or bark so that they're well camouflaged again in the fall and winter. And in this case, the male and the female look different. The male is on the bottom left, and then the female is in the middle bottom there. So this now is the Baltimore butterfly, with a host plant of turtlehead. This chrysalis is attached itself just like the monarch chrysalis does, only at the one end. So it's different the way it attaches itself from the swallowtails. And then here you see the top picture there, the upper side of the Baltimore, and then the lower picture there is the underside of the Baltimore butterfly. It's not a real common butterfly in Michigan. The swallowtails all are pretty, that we just reviewed were fairly common. This is the red admiral. The host plants are nettles. This is a butterfly that really is a more southern butterfly, but moves into our region in spring. And some years, a lot of them arrive in Michigan in spring, and some years just a few. None of their life stages can survive the winter here in Michigan. So on the left, you again have the egg. The caterpillars can look very different, even at the same instar stage. They can look very different in color and pattern. And then the chrysalis, again, attached just at one end, and has those pretty golden spots. And on the bottom, you have the underside of the butterfly, and then the upper side of the butterfly. So the host plants, I said, is nettles. So this is unusual when the tiny little caterpillar first emerges from that tiny egg. So let's look again. See how tiny that egg is. Well, the caterpillar comes out of there has to be pretty small. What it does, it has a little bit of latex kind of stuff that it spins, and it folds up a leaf, and it develops inside of that leaf, eating parts of the leaf. When they're small, they just eat a little bit of the surface of the leaf. And when they get bigger, they eat more of a leaf, and they may even move onto a new leaf and fold that up as well. But here you see a late instar red admiral, and you can see where it's getting ready to fold that leaf together. And then that shows the picture on the bottom, on the right there shows a folded leaf. So if you're out there looking at nettles, be careful when you touch the nettles, because they do sting. But if you see a folded leaf like that, you're pretty sure that there is a red admiral caterpillar inside, or has been. I've found many caterpillars. Some years are really good years for red admirals, and that's when you find a lot of caterpillars inside those folded leaves. Just one per leaf. This is the viceroy butterfly. Looks a lot like the monarch. It's a little smaller, and it has a line through the hind wing. So some people can confuse it with the monarch. But it is somewhat smaller. And it again has two color morphs. It has the green color morph and the tan color morph in the caterpillar stage. And here we have two butterflies, the comma and the question mark. The host plants are elm, nettle, or hops. We call them angle wings because they have the kind of jagged edges to the wings. And while the colors are different, they both have these little spiky spines. And you can tell the comma because it has that little white mark on the wing that looks like a comma. And on the case of the question mark, you can see that little white dot, and above that there's a little white line, so it kind of looks like a question mark. The chrysalises of the two look very similar, and they have kind of jagged edges as well, just like the butterflies do. So this is the question. I showed you this picture of the eggs before, where the two eggs were stacked on top of each other. So the center picture there shows after the caterpillar, the tiny little caterpillars, which are on the right, after they've emerged from those eggs. And then you'd see picture on the bottom right are two actually caterpillars. One has they're two different instars, and they look slightly different, even though they're about the same size. The one has just shed skin. And then on the left are the final instars of the question mark. American lady. The American lady is another one of these, just like the red admiral, that is more of a southern species that moves into our area in spring. It is usually quite abundant. The host plants are everlasting and pussy toads. The chrysalis attaches itself just at one end again. And the underside and the upper side look quite different. They don't overwinter here in Michigan, and there seems to be a southward migration that has been observed, just not as far as the monarch migrates all the way down to Mexico, but they seem to move south to escape our winters here, which they wouldn't be able to survive. And then there's the painted lady. Again, one of these that comes up from the south. It is much less common to come here than the American lady. Its host plants are thistles. In this case, it's a field thistle. And it has a really pretty chrysalis as well. And you see the butterfly on the bottom left. Again, it has those little little clubs of the antenna that I think are very attractive. It actually has two-toned in this case, black and kind of orange. The variegated fritillary is one of several fritillaries found in our area. It is more of a southern species, and we are at the northern edge of its range, so it's less common than some of the other fritillaries. But I did manage to find its colorful caterpillar feeding on violets, the major host plant for all our fritillaries. While we had other fritillary species flying around in our yard, I never found any of the caterpillars. I have to admit that I likely just missed them as they are dark and drab, and bending over to inspect the underside of violet leaves is hard on the back. And then we have a number of butterflies that we call, in Michigan, that we call skippers. And starting from the top right is the leaf skipper, then the peck skipper, and on the bottom left is the silver-spotted skipper. The one that the little skippers, the ones that are orange and brown, are sometimes very hard to distinguish from each other, and there's a whole bunch of them that look very similar. But the silver-spotted skipper is bigger than all of those, and it has that bright white spot. So it is one that most people will recognize when they see it as a skipper. And its host plant are legumes. So like black locust is a good host plant for the silver-spotted skipper. Whereas the other two skippers here that I'm showing, the host plants are grasses. We never think of grasses as host plants, but there's a number of moths and butterflies whose host plants are grasses. And then we have the cabbage white. It's a non-native species. Its host plants are wild and cultivated crucifers, which are cabbages. And friends of ours gave us some kale that they had raised without pesticides. So when I was washing the kale, I found a caterpillar. And, you find a caterpillar, you have to raise it. So I saved some of the kale out for the caterpillar, and I raised it. And it actually forms a very pretty chrysalis. And kind of like, so when you have the monarch chrysalis, you can already, just before it comes out, you can already see the dark coloring of the monarch through the chrysalis. And in this case here, you can see the white, cabbage white through the chrysalis. So it is kind of fun to raise it. I mentioned the proboscis earlier when I talked about the anatomical features of the butterflies. It is a coiled, hollow tongue that butterflies can uncurl and insert into a flower to sip nectar. And here you have a great spangled fritillary doing just that. So this is one of the fritillaries that I never found a caterpillar for. The other thing that they need the proboscis for is for a thing called puddling. So they do need water, but they also need minerals. So sometimes if you see a bunch of butterflies in a puddle by the roadside, the water that is puddled there, will dissolve some of the minerals that are in the soil. And usually it's kind of a gravelly spot where you will find this. And they will suck up the water, sip up on the water, and get some minerals at the same time. So now we'll go over some of the plants that are the pictures of the plants that I mentioned earlier. There are native plants that we want to plant for both nectar, and some of them are actually also the caterpillar host plants. So here's a couple of spring flowering one, like the golden Alexander is one of the earliest spring native plants to flower, and actually, it is also the host plant for the black swallowtails. And of course, on the right, you have the lupin, which is the host plant for one of the endangered butterflies, the garnet blue butterfly. But other butterflies will use it for nectar, and bumblebees just love the lupin flowers. So if you have a patch of lupin, you'll have lots of bumblebees. Excellent nectar plants are the milkweeds. So on the left, for example, is the swamp milkweed with some skippers on it, unidentified as this point. And then you have the monarch on common milkweed, and you have viceroy on butterfly weed. So 3 the three of our common milkweeds in our area are all good nectar plants, not only for butterflies, but for other insects as well. And here you see a nice butterfly weed with a, I didn't count, 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 coral hair streaks in that picture. This was taken by my husband in the Allegan State Game area, which is actually a good place to go for looking for butterflies. So purple coneflower are excellent nectar plants. In this case, you have a Delaware skipper, one of those little tan brownish skippers again, and a spice bush swallowtail on the purple coneflower. These are kind of midsummer flowers now. Start blooming, I think, usually like in, I would say, in early July maybe. Blazing stars, again, very good midsummer flower nectar sources. Here with the monarch and silver-spotted skipper. Blue vervain, another one of those skippers. Black-eyed Susan. And ironweed is really a very good nectar plant. And in this case, I mentioned earlier, these are the 2 tiger swallowtails, whereas the right one, it's either a male or female, but the one on the left has to be a female tiger swallowtail. Wild bergamot is a real draw for butterflies. And you can see there's a couple fritillaries on there, and then there is actually, so there's 2 different species of fritillaries there. On the left is a great spangled, and on the right is an Aphrodite. So again, these were in our yard, and I never found a caterpillar. Then on the right, you have a buckeye. Actually, there's 2 buckeyes, and they're mating. And it's hard to see, but the one is perpendicular to the other one. They're hooked up at the hind end. Only one of them you can really see the top side of the butterfly. I think they're one of the prettiest butterflies around here in Michigan. And another great spangled fritillary here, but on pasture thistle. And I just had to throw in a moth here. The snowberry clearwing moth. It's one of the sphinx moths, and it's getting nectar from a butterfly bush. Butterfly bush is not a native species, but it is a real draw for providing nectar for butterflies. And it has become invasive as far north as New Jersey. So the best thing, if you do want to plant a butterfly bush, you want to just cut all the flower. After the flowers are done flowering, just cut the flowers off. Just the old flowers, just cut them off and throw them in the garbage so the plant can't reproduce by seeds, and plant them in a place that you can't really spread by roots. So I think it's okay to plant them if you plant them in the right way. And the other reason I showed the snowberry clearing is because I've had many people tell me that they've had baby hummingbirds at their flowers. And well, hummingbirds, when they come out of the nest, they stay in the nest until they're fully grown, and when they come out of the nest, they're the same size as the adult hummingbirds. So these baby hummingbirds really aren't hummingbirds. They are the snowberry, and there's another swing swallow, which is called the hummingbird's clearing. So these moths really are not baby hummingbirds. So here's another very good nectar plant, and this is a little bit later in the summer, and that's the Joe Pye weed. It likes the soil a little bit wetter than some of the other plants that you might want to plant. It doesn't have to be a wetland by any means, but it likes a little bit more moisture in the soil. And here you got a buckeye again, and American lady. And in the same family of plants as boneset. Now, boneset in the wild you usually just find in kind of at the edge of ponds or creeks and things like that. They require maybe a little bit more moisture than the Joe Pye weed. But they're good plants, and if you are able to water them, if you have a real dry spell, I think they're very good plants to grow in your yard. And these are kind of, both these are a little bit later in the summer than some of the other ones that I just showed you. And in this case, we've got an orange sulfur butterfly and a red admiral. Now we come to the fall. So for the fall, you want to plant asters and goldenrods. And asters are really very beautiful. And the monarchs really need the asters in the fall to fatten up for during migration for, overwintering in Mexico. So asters are very important nectar plants in the fall. And they're very pretty. And lots of butterflies use them. I didn't show any goldenrods. For some reason, I didn't have any pictures of butterflies on goldenrods. But goldenrods are also very good nectar plants. And it's a myth that goldenrods is what gives people allergies. The allergies are caused by ragweeds, which have very small green flowers, very inconspicuous flowers, and they're green. And that's what gives people allergies, and not the bright orange and yellow goldenrods that you see fields of in the fall. So goldenrods really are good plants to plant for nectar plants, and they really don't give you allergies. You shouldn't overlook shrubs and vines as sources of nectar for butterflies. And for example, here, buttonbush, which is a shrub, and then virgin's bower, which is a vine. So there are many threats that butterflies face. Some of them are natural threats, and some of them are obviously man-made threats. The biggest threats actually on insects are probably other insects. And in this case here, I show two predatory stink bugs. They have a long snout-like thing, and they pierce a caterpillar, and they suck out the inside part of the caterpillars as their food source. So these stink bugs are a fairly common predator on caterpillars. And there's a thing called parasitism. In this case here, I'm showing the tachinid fly parasitism. So what happens, the fly, top left, looks pretty much like a housefly in a way if you just see it flying around. It lays its eggs on a monarch caterpillar, for example. And when those eggs hatch, they burrow into the caterpillar. And as the caterpillar goes about eating, the larvae of the fly eat the insides of the poor caterpillar. And eventually they kill the caterpillar, or it can kill the monarch both at the caterpillar stage, at the J stage, or at the chrysalis stage. And so the fly larvae come out of any of those stages, and after a short time, after a couple hours, the larvae just form the pupa. It just the outside of the larva kind of hardens, and inside of the pupal case, the fly develops, and about 10 days later, out comes a fly. So the kindred fly parasitism kills quite a few monarchs. And there's fly parasitism also killed other caterpillars, but this is one that's fairly well known to do that, to happen. This species of butterfly, it happens to quite a bit. The bane of some of the other butterflies are ichneumon wasps, and I've had 3 different species of these wasps come out of chrysalises. One of our red admiral, one of our American lady, one of our spicebush swallowtail. They come out of the chrysalises. So when you have a nice chrysalis of some of these butterflies, and you think you're going to have a butterfly come out, unfortunately, you sometimes can get one of these wasps come out. These wasps are, they don't sting people. They just, they really just want to lay their eggs on caterpillars, and so that their larvae can develop inside the chrysalis. The whole life cycle of these wasps takes place inside the chrysalis. And then there is wasp parasitism, not the big ichneumon wasps, but there's a whole bunch of smaller wasps called braconid wasps. And, for example, the top left, there, the white fuzzy stuff is cocoons of braconid wasps that parasitize this red admiral caterpillar. And there's another species of wasp that actually parasitizes the very small caterpillars. And that's what's at the bottom left there. That's the cocoon of a tiny wasp that parasitized the tiny red admiral caterpillar. And on the right is another, it's a Baltimore caterpillar with the cocoons spun by these small, minute braconid wasps. And you can, the wasps have come out of that white fuzzy stuff. So they are really tiny. So a major man-created problem for butterflies is habitat destruction. And lawns are really not necessary. they're really not what we really need. We can do without lawns, really. I mean, we can't do without vegetables and fruit, say, but we could do without lawns. So, for example, in 2005, NASA estimated the following from satellite imaging, and since 2005, it has only become worse. So lawns take up 40 million acres in the lower 48 states. Lawns use 3 times as much space as irrigated corn. 1.9% of continental U.S. surface is in lawns, 3 to 5% in Michigan. And the EPA estimates 9 billion gallons of water per day used on lawns. So it's a real problem to have those pretty lawns. They would be much better for everyone involved. And since we're talking about butterflies in this case, if those lawns were converted to butterfly habitat or pollinator habitat, flowers, shrubs, and you plant fruiting shrubs, for example, the butterfly, the pollinators can use the pollen, and then the shrubs produce berries in the fall for birds. So planting for wildlife instead of having lawns is a very important thing to do. The other thing is to avoid pesticides, especially what we call the systemic pesticides, like the neonicotinoids. These pesticides, if they're put in the soil, the plants will take up these pesticides, and they will be in the leaves and even in the nectar. So a butterfly comes along and drinks nectar out of a plant that has been treated with neonicotinoids. It will likely, if it doesn't kill it, it will weaken it, and it could get killed from other causes. So this is what these pesticides have been some of the major contributors to the honeybee collapse, colony collapse that has been going on. So there are other causes too, but this is one of them. So it is best not to use pesticides, and if you landscape with native plants, you don't really need to use the pesticides. Besides, if you do find a few caterpillars on your plants, you should be happy. I'm always happy to see my plants with holes in them, because then I know something has been eating them. It might be something interesting that I can study. Not using pesticides does require a change in mindset. So just a couple words on the photo acknowledgments. Some were taken by my husband, Russ Skipper, and most of them I took. So that is it.